Please call the roll.
Senator Rocky Adams. Here. Senator Higdon. Here. Senator West. Senator Yates. Representative Bratcher.
Here.
Representative Bridges. Representative Burke.
Here.
Representative Kleins.
Here.
Senator Mills.
I'm here.
Representative Witten.
Here. And having a quorum present, we are now constituted to do business. The minutes of the July 29th meeting have been available online for review. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The minutes are approved. Well, thank you. Well, at this time, I'll request Mayor Gordon and anyone with her to approach the table. And while they're coming forward, do any of the members of the task force have any recognition of guests that they'd like to make? Okay. Well, welcome, Mayor Gordon, and please identify yourself for the record and proceed when you are ready.
Thank you so much. I'm Linda Gorton, Mayor of Lexington, and Senator Mills, Representative Witten, and members of the task force, thank you for having us today. I would like to thank you, first of all, for your support of our community. We appreciate your commitment of public safety and public service, and we are happy to work together with you. You have asked us here to speak about our housing needs and what we're doing to address them. With me today is my Commissioner of Housing Advocacy and Community Development, Charlie Lanter. I also have with me my Commissioner of Planning, Keith Horn, as well as my Chief Economic Development Officer, Kevin Adkins, and my Chief of Staff, Tyler Scott. So we can all agree that housing issues are complex, they are challenging, and so one of the most critical areas of my administration to prioritize is to increase our housing stock, particularly of affordable housing. We work on this every day because we know that housing is one of the foundations of a strong city. It touches every aspect of our lives. For example, as one of the state's largest economic engines, Lexington's businesses are dependent on a reliable workforce. That workforce requires housing that's affordable. Lexington is experiencing the same housing affordability and supply issues as many other cities across the state and across this country. As the only fully merged city-county government in the Commonwealth, and one of a very few merged governments nationwide, Lexington's housing policies must be attentive to the housing needs of both the rural and the urban areas. Both areas are extremely important to our local and state economy. Rural Fayette County is home to farms that are thriving businesses. In addition to being a signature industry for our state, these farms contribute $2.3 billion each year to the economy. In Lexington, and probably in most cities, affordable housing can mean different things to different people. By national standards, housing is considered affordable when housing costs are no more than 30% of the gross household income. In Lexington, there are different types of affordable housing that are designed to meet different needs. We have subsidized affordable housing for residents of the lowest incomes, including many low-income seniors. Subsidized workforce housing for the working poor. It targets a bit higher income level, but remains affordable to the average worker. And then we have housing that is affordable, often for those buying their first home. Creating these different types of affordable housing involves different approaches to development, different funding sources, and different support services. I want to start with some information about subsidized housing, affordable housing, and workforce housing units. Affordable housing units are essential for Lexington's working families and seniors. And you may know already that in Lexington, 25% of our population is 55 or older, seniors. Those residing in Lexington's affordable housing units often work in the service industries, restaurants, hotels, hospitals, schools, etc. Our affordable housing offers a variety of wraparound services depending on the development and the residents. Those may include social workers, health services, job training, or substance use disorder treatment. 10 years ago, our urban county government established Lexington's Affordable Housing Fund. Since then, Lexington has invested more than $48 million in the fund. $430 million has been leveraged from other public and private resources to fund the construction and preservation of just over 3,500 subsidized affordable housing units. People who live in Lexington's subsidized affordable housing units in 2024 have an average annual household income of $22,575. Lexington is taking steps to learn more about and improve the availability of housing that is affordable. First step, our government is conducting a housing needs assessment study to get a clear picture of our local housing needs. Our numbers haven't been updated in about 10 years. Good statistics are critical to understanding our housing needs. One reason for this study is to get a clear picture of Lexington's housing stock, including housing for all income levels, and how any deficits are affecting our city. We expect this study to demonstrate that we have needs across the entire spectrum of the housing market, just as other statewide studies have shown. Secondly, in terms of growth, the Urban County Council voted to approve the expansion of Lexington's urban service boundary in June of 2023, taking the first step to expansion. Recently, Lexington's Planning Commission recommended a 2,800-acre expansion in 5 locations across Lexington-Fayette County. In our merged government, we call the border between our urban area and our rural area our urban service boundary. We must be attentive to the needs of both the urban and rural areas. In some limited ways, our urban service boundary functions like the city limits in other counties. It is a growth boundary and a service boundary. When we expand the urban service boundary into the rural area, and we are currently in the process of doing that, we allow denser development on that land as we bring this property into our urban core. Just as legislative bodies in counties with separate city and county governments make the decisions on which land to annex, in Lexington, the Planning Commission decides which land to bring into the urban core, resetting our urban service boundary. The Urban County Council has an oversight role. The current expansion is specifically aimed at producing additional housing. The master plan for these new areas calls for between 17,000 and 26,000 new dwelling units. This would ultimately provide for between 59,000 and 78,000 new residents in Lexington-Fayette County. The previous expansion took place in 1996 and included approximately 5,300 acres. Today, approximately 2,940 acres remain to be developed from the 1996 expansion. Third step, In addition to expanding the urban services boundary, we have been making changes to our zoning laws to support housing growth. These changes are recent, but we are already seeing developers choose housing options under the new regulations. These changes include generous workforce and affordable housing density bonuses, expansion of the housing types permitted in some zones, including workforce housing, reduced minimum lot sizes, established maximum lot sizes, and reduced setback to improve land use efficiency, increase in building heights in the medium and high-density zones, variety in housing types required to address workforce housing needs, and removing zoning barriers to neighborhoods serving business uses. The fourth step, we have significantly grown our financial commitment to affordable housing, and you have helped. We received $10 million in your last budget as a state contribution to affordable housing, and we thank you for that. Locally, starting with this fiscal year, we are committing 1% of our general fund revenues to affordable housing each year. As a result, the fiscal year 2025 budget includes nearly $5 million that will go to preservation and development of affordable housing. In addition, in 2022, we created a Department of Housing Advocacy and Community Development to put a strong emphasis on housing community-wide. We've hired housing advocates who help primarily low-income residents find housing. And we created the Housing Repair Assistance Program to help low-income homeowners stay in their homes. We look forward to continuing the work with Frankfurt to address this growing need. We need your assistance and support on a number of initiatives. They include growing the local developer core, especially within affordable housing, creation of revolving loan funds for market rate and affordable housing projects, exploring an affordable housing tax credit concept with the legislature to offset the cost of development, working with the legislature to design land bank concepts, making more property within urban service boundaries accessible to housing, working with the legislature to review statutes and regulations that may expedite housing projects. So those are just a few of the things that we have done and a few of the things that we are thinking about in terms of where we could partner with the legislature. And I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to come to you today and to talk about what we've been doing and what we see as some of the needs to help with affordable housing. And I'll just close. I have a registered nurse background. I worked a full career in nursing, and you know, sometimes the city's like a big patient. You identify the needs and where we're healthy, and you make a plan and take action toward those things that need improved. And we work on this housing issue every day, and we're just very thankful for your interest in it, and any of us are happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mayor Gordon. I really appreciate your presentation. We do have a few questions.
Okay.
I had a quick question on just some clarification on one of your slides that said changes made to zoning laws to support housing growth. I think. Yes. Are those the changes that you have already made or that you recommend?
No, those are changes that we've made.
And do you know the time frame that you did these?
Call on my Commissioner Lanter to speak to that. Or maybe my Commissioner of Planning. That's a better.
Thank you for having us today. Again, I'm Keith Horn. The most recent zone change, the zone ordinance text amendment, went into effect at the end of June. So all of these, and it's been a steady pace over the past few years, but the most recent significant changes are as of June.
So it's safe to say we have not really seen any results yet.
Not from the most recent changes, which include the density bonuses for affordable or workforce housing. But as we go forward, finalizing the master plan for the most recent expansion of that 2,800 acres, you should hopefully see a bigger impact as that land starts to develop as well.
Great. Thank you. We also have a question from Representative Bratcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can remember, I'm one of the ones that's been here a long time, and I can remember some serious zoning issues you guys had in the 90s. I mean, there was a lot of battles down there. I don't know if you guys were around during that time, but there was a real, compared to Louisville, which where I'm from, there was a real squeeze not to allow too much development that you'd be sorry for later. And I was following that quite a bit. But, the mayor of Louisville came with a specific figure of this is how many houses we're short, or homes we're short, or people we need to house. Do you guys have a shortage problem?
We are doing, as I mentioned earlier, the housing assessment to see exactly what kinds of housing and how much housing we need. And I think that kind of addresses that issue is we feel in Lexington we need to be working off of data, and we want to know for sure what the study shows. We believe we are short of housing. That's why we are putting a lot of our resources into affordable housing. That is a huge need for us. And that housing for the workforce, where they're mostly in the service industries. I was not around then, so I missed
Not
all
very
that.
many were.
I missed all that 1990s kerfluffle, but we do know that we need housing. This housing study should tell us how much.
But right now you don't have like a pressing need for new housing space?
You might be talking about, I'm not sure if you're meaning affordable housing. You may be talking about housing that's affordable to, for instance, people who want to buy their first home.
No, Mayor, I'm talking about like when the mayor of Louisville came, he said, look, we've got a problem, and we've got this many people that this is how much space we've got to have in the next year or two or whatever it was. And it just doesn't seem like you guys have that pressing need. And I'm just curious.
Well, we do have a need, but we like to know what our need is, and we continue to build housing while we're doing this study. The new expansion that will come online is specifically, as I noted earlier, for housing. And, I mentioned our 25% of our residents are elderly. We need elderly housing, and some of that is subsidized housing. So we continue to build. We haven't stopped building. But we want to get a better handle on exactly how much we need. I think you saw from the numbers that the new expansion area will provide up to 78,000. So that's a pretty good, we grow about 30,000 people every decade in Lexington, according to our census. So we hope that'll take us a couple decades down the road, but we want to be sure through our study.
Representative Bridges.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor Gordon, I'm curious, what is the housing density bonuses you spoke of? Can you explain those?
My Commissioner of Planning has a real handle on that.
The most recent zoning ordinance text provides for, if you're doing affordable housing or workforce housing, which means under the ordinance, affordable housing would be 80% of average median income, and then workforce would be 120% of average median income. They automatically get the zone higher without going through a zone change.
Okay.
So it's both a density bonus, but it's also a process.
So it's not a financial bonus.
The money part of it is a different aspect with the Affordable Housing Fund and the other funds available. And I think what the affordable housing people will always tell you is there's two things government can try to provide. One is land, the other is dollars to do it. And then part of what we can do is make those, for the land you have in certain zones, easier to increase density on by not requiring a zone change for the next highest level if you're providing the level of housing that I referenced.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor, thank you for your presentation, and I think that's what this committee's doing. Is you said you're doing an assessment of what the needs are, and we're certainly gathering information, and I'm trying to get my arms around what are the needs. And one of the slides you had up there, you had $430 million that you'd put back into housing, 3,504 units. Doing the math, that's about $122,000 per unit. And if you use the same math on your $5 million that you're putting out of your budget each year, that's about 40 houses that you can build a year. But I guess building costs being what they are, and I guess trying to figure out what can we do when we talk about affordable. Is $122,000 per unit affordable, and what's the size of those? Can we do something smaller, more efficient? That's what I'm trying to get my hands around. Is what is truly, affordable housing for, if you have a single worker, that's one category. Families, obviously, another category.
So let me go back to some of the numbers that you quoted. The $5 million a year is in our government's budget to go into our affordable housing fund. That money is what is used to leverage the $430 million from banks or other partners who want to invest in affordable housing. And so our $5 million goes into our fund, and that will be used to leverage the other dollars. I'm going to ask Commissioner Lanter to talk with you specifically about affordable housing. Affordable housing is if you take a voucher to help pay for your rent, and we have different levels of that, and Charlie's the expert at that.
Sure, and thank you, Senator Higdon, for your question. With regards to the numbers, what we see with our local affordable housing fund, our average investment now has been around $20,000 per unit in terms of the local dollars going in. That has increased significantly. When we started this fund 10 years ago, that number was closer to $12,000. So that's just the rising cost of construction and everything else that's gone into that. Same thing with the number you calculated out of the 430 is our total cost per unit has gone up significantly over those 10 years. But to the second part of your question, we need every type of it. We need every type of housing. We're short, especially on housing for people who are coming out of homelessness or coming out of institutions, people who are at or below 30% of our area median income, which requires heavy subsidy for those units to work. But we also need workforce housing, which is sort of the whole other end of that spectrum. Back to the question on the total numbers, Our local study is still underway and will be finished sometime in mid-October, but we know from the study Kentucky Housing has already presented to you that our number is somewhere on the order of over 20,000 units that we need, and that again runs the spectrum of the lowest, extremely low-income units all the way up to just regular market rate houses for people to buy. So I hope that answered your question, but I'm glad to expand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I follow up? Just hopefully your study will show what type of housing, single, 600, 700, 800 square foot housing, up to 1,200-1,500 foot housing for families, or just something specific where you. I think that's what I need to try to understand is. One size doesn't fit all. It's going to be a lot, like you said, a lot of different needs, a lot of different sizes, a lot of different cost points or price points. And I'd appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. A market study is a big part of that, and that's going to look at not just how many units do we need, but how many units of each size, how many 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and then within that, how many of each income bracket. So, before we go all in investing millions of dollars, we need to make sure we're prioritizing that towards the greatest needs.
Thank you.
Senator Yates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor, thank you for being here, both of you. I know this has been, back when I was on local council, this has been an issue for, a strong decade. When we were going to travel in other cities, they told us, you're next, when we were walking in. And so I'm glad that we're now trying to get together. What I try to do is make sure that we don't confuse the general public when we talk about the need for housing. We say, well, what type of housing? Well, it's kind of like musical chairs. If there's missing a chair, they're going to go to the next one. And so if you don't have enough affordable housing, then a lot of times then they'll be forced to move into the workforce housing, which increases the market. So if you don't have enough housing in any kind of tier, it messes up the way the income levels are. So what I've learned is we just have to build housing. And I remember, I think that you guys did have some study where your plans of development were somewhere between 17,000 and 30,000 houses a year. I think it was Lexington was trying to keep up because and we did our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I think at 11 million, and I think you were trying to get it at 5 million. It's the best I can remember. But it's not just how much it is per door that we're building, it's how much you can incentivize. And so government can't build all our affordable housing. Right. What we do is we look for a P3, a public-private partnership, to incentivize developers into doing so. And so if we can just, these incentives, and that's why I think the state legislature can make a big deal of like the tax credits and the things, because when I play around in some real estate, but it makes it a whole lot harder to do that when the cost of materials are up, when the labor costs are up, and now the interest rates are up. Well, it's hard to have a cap return on affordable housing right now unless there's some type of incentive. And so I think that's where we come in. And so I really appreciate some of the ideas, and hopefully we can come through with that.
Thank you, Senator Yates.
Representative Burke.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor, for being here. Thank you to the commissioners as well. I really am grateful for the work that Lexington is doing to advance affordable housing for all of our residents, and I know that that's a commitment that you continue to follow through day after day. So I want to thank you. I have two different questions. The first is, of course, you know that in this last session, the General Assembly passed House Bill 18, which made it impossible for cities like Lexington and Louisville to have source of income bans for rental housing. So that was something that the council had already passed, and we said you can't do that. Is that something that you would like for us to revisit in the coming session?
Thank you very much, Representative Burke. I think that the council initiated that and felt that it was the right thing to do, and they did pass it before your legislation occurred. I think our council probably would always be interested in that. There hasn't been any discussion of it because they are certainly respectful of the state legislation.
Of course, and I appreciate that so much. I think we're just looking at everything's on the table right now. So we really want to do something meaningful, and so that's one item that I'll be looking at as we come into the next session. My second question related to one of your slides that referred to the 1996 expansion of the urban service boundary. Yes. And I'm wondering, what are the impediments or barriers to developing the 2,940 acres, which were not yet developed from the 1996 expansion? Is that something that the state can help with?
Well, that's a great question. And 96 is what, 30? We're 30 years out. There are two big things First of all, some of the landowners don't want to develop. A landowner, a property owner, needs to want to do that. And secondly, it's expensive to develop. And it's interesting the way our services boundary, I don't know about other cities, how they do it when they annex, but we do contiguous land because that's the least expensive way to expand. If you pick a farm a couple miles out, it's very expensive to get the sewers, the roads, all the infrastructure out there. And part of the expense to any expansion is that infrastructure. It's police services, it's fire stations, it's everything imaginable to serve the area. So I think those are the two most prominent reasons is some of those property owners have decided not to expand or build, and then it's very expensive.
Thank you for your answer. I'm, again, coming up with ideas, anything that we can do. Would it be helpful if when we look at the road plan, which will be 2 years from now because we've just passed one, if we prioritized projects that helped with infrastructure, looking at main thoroughfares that can develop toward other outlying areas. So I'm just thinking like Winchester Road. Winchester Road has lots of developable land, but it needs sewers, it needs fire hydrants, it needs a lot of things. So would it be helpful if when we're thinking about what projects to fund, we worked with you to identify those spaces that were appropriate for that?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Winchester Road because a good bit of our expansion land that we're currently working on is right there off Winchester Road. It abuts Winchester Road. And yes, we will need all of the infrastructure. It's farmland right now. So we'll need all the roadways, we'll need all the sewers, all the, stormwater infrastructure, all of that before we can ever get in there and build houses. And so I think that's a very good point that you make because that's all part of what we're going to have to do.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Senator Mills.
Leaning back in my chair there. Caught me off guard. Well, thank y'all for coming today. I think your presentation shows, similar to what Louisville showed when they came before us, is that there's a lot of thought being put toward housing, affordable housing in our metro areas. And but I guess my question has to do with just in general, kind of what Senator Higdon was saying. We're trying to get our hands around, housing statewide. When you pull out of urban areas, housing is a different beast. But in general, two questions, I guess. When y'all are recruiting business and industry, I know they do their homework and kind of do a computation as, hey, if I'm bringing in 200 people, will there be homes for them? Do you bump up against challenges when you're recruiting multiple hundreds of people coming in to Lexington, finding housing that is in, the $300,000 range, $400,000 range, $200,000 range? Is that a common issue that you're challenged with? And then my other question was on the density bonus, and you answered that. I was very interested in what that was. And then finally, Senator Yates talked about tax credits, and tax credits aren't the most favorable thing with our A&R folks these days. So we got to figure out a way to convince them of those things. But if you could just give us kind of the general idea of, is it tough to find a house for a family of four that's looking to bump up in housing, and then the recruiting question as well? Just a general concept.
I would say in general, when we have companies that come, of course they're looking for housing, they're looking at the schools, and they're looking at quality of life. Those are kind of a top tier, and the housing market right now is, if you're a seller, you are in good shape. It's a seller's market. And this is why I think our expansion took place, is because we do need more of that kind of housing. They always want housing for their workforce. So we believe this will help. I don't think we're in dire straits yet, because most of the folks who are moving to Lexington can find a house. Sometimes it takes a little while to find their price point. You mentioned, and just very briefly, I wanted to follow up with you on your tax credits, and Senator Yates, thank you for bringing that up. Lexington has really used effectively the historic tax credits many different times, so we were thinking that that concept might be something to talk about. Because we've seen the success in historic tax credits. Great examples are Old Courthouse, which is now repurposed into several entities who are in there. So, but I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I had just one more quick question.
Okay.
We hadn't really talked about the home building workforce. Will your study identify any challenges that your city has with the people that will actually build these houses? Because we've talked many times that you can appropriate the funds, and if there's no one to build the houses, you're in the same mess. So can you speak on that a little bit?
Thank you very much, Senator Whitten. I want to say a few words about that and then ask Commissioner Lanter to speak to the study, whether anything is in that. But, our building industry started its own building industry trade school because of the difficulty finding people who are qualified to do the building. And it's everything from HVAC to plumbing to all those kinds of things that they need. It's been extremely successful to get people into those jobs. So they went ahead and did it themselves. And it's working really well. I don't know, can you talk about the study and whether it will show anything?
The study is going to look at all of the barriers to housing development and to what's leading to our challenges. And inevitably, that is going to include the capacity of the builders. And I think anecdotally, you can already see that in our other programming. We run a housing rehabilitation program that does up to $40,000 of repair for low-income homeowners. We often only get one or two bidders from contractors to do that work on a home. So we have had great struggles with finding them just to do rehabs or emergency repairs. And so we know that capacity that struggled after 2008, after the crash of the market, has not rebounded, and that is part of the challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you so much for your time. We may be running out. We have a few transit road issues in Lexington tonight, so thank you very much for your
Drive
time.
safe. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
And Judge
you.
Lewis, I think we're ready for you. So please have a seat, along with anyone else that you have brought with you.
It's over there.
And Judge Lewis, if you could just identify yourself for the record and make sure the green light is on your microphone.
I'm sorry. I apologize. pretty loud anyway. Representative Witten, Senator Mills, committee members and guests in the room, and even you folks running the cameras. I appreciate you being here, and I want to thank you for allowing me to sit here before you this afternoon. I know your time is valuable. You've got other jobs, as do I, so I thank you for your time. Elliott County has been suffering from a diminishing population for several decades due to non-job growth in and around our area. For many years, we've watched good families pack up and leave Elliott to chase the American dream elsewhere because it could not be realized here at home. And the once profitable tobacco crops that our farmers work so hard to have primary or supplemental income from were removed about 25 years ago as well. This has caused the median income to sink into record lows and businesses to also close because one cannot survive without the prosperity of the other. Consequently, this has caused the lowering of our property values, thus dropping our property tax rates, and is choking our school system tax base to scary levels of need. We have schools that are struggling. They need educators, they need staff, they need bus drivers. And I know that you've all seen the news and the media, and you've heard it from your own constituents how bad we need bus drivers and we need school teachers in Kentucky. This has exacerbated in the aging infrastructure of our facilities as well, causing bond ability to lower due to lack of overall revenues in those systems. However, the catalyst of a blessing to this is our General Assembly and our governor, in a bipartisan partnership, committed $114 million to double the size of the Little Sandy Correctional Complex. This investment back into Elliott will send a generational ripple into homes right here by assuring a much more respectable living wage is available to those who choose to stay and find their version of the American dream right there in Sandy Hook. I still get cold chills when I think of a 22-year-old boy from Elliott County making $55,000 a year in that county, living only 15 to 20 minutes from work. That simply was never something I could do at that age. I went to work for Pilot Travel Centers in Grayson with a salary of $20,000 when I was 22. And in 23, I moved to Erlanger for a salary of $34,000 plus bonus, putting me up to $40,000. If I got my sales right, got my losses in check, and you grew profits and lowered expenses. I do realize that that was a few years ago, but even then, if you wanted $40K or more on your W-2, you had to head toward Lexington. It's funny, Mayor Gordon was just here. Or even Cincinnati, because that kind of pay simply wasn't available anywhere in Elliott County. I'm grateful for this commitment in Elliott County. I want to say thank you to all y'all. That $114 million, you're changing a generation. Thank you. However, with new investments in people comes new challenges for people. Once construction is completed, our prison, LSCC, will be adding up to 150 new jobs. The clock for demand of quality housing for prison workers is now ticking, and so far, we're already late. I am so proud that this need is now presenting itself, but it is up to us to move on it. Elliott currently has the best internet in the world. We have Mountain Rural Telephone up there. We have fiber. This BEAD project, you'll not see anybody from Morgan, Elliott, Wolf, Menifee ask for one dime when it comes to the BEAD project. Because of investments that were made and money that was sought after in the General Assembly over 20 years ago, fiber was ran then. And we're very thankful then for y'all, the work that you did, and we're thankful today for what we have. During COVID, when everyone else was buffering and we were trying to live our lives and run our meetings, I was sitting in my house in Sandy Hook, my 2 kids taking classes online, my wife teaching kindergarten online. I'm sure Netflix or KidsTube was playing in the background, and I ran business of Elliott County as if nothing was changed. Meanwhile, when I'm talking to Frankfurt or I'm on other Zoom calls, they're buffering and they're having struggles. We don't have that in Elliott County. Shameless plug for Elliott County's internet. So I'll go back to what I had written. I'm proud to see this need presenting itself, but it's up to us to move Elliott County We also have municipal water sources which can be tapped in as well. Where we lack is funding. Once potential properties are located, to purchase, design, begin the phases of development, and construct proper wastewater facilities within, that's where we struggle. You just heard the mayor talk about the what they had put in, what the city of Lexington had put in. Where I struggle with my tax base in Elliott County is I don't have those matches. And I thank you all for House Bill 723 and some of the things we're working through with that and becoming House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 91. I truly thank you there. This is no different than what we are seeing in other areas of the state. But now we are part of the needs improvement category as well when it comes to housing. On the day we broke ground at the LSCC prison, Rocky Aggins was there, Senator Philip Wheeler was there, Representative Richard White was there. We had other local interested individuals there. Representatives from the construction company was there. And I think I was the only one that whenever that gold-plated shovel hit the ground, I went, holy crap, where are these 150 new employees going to live? Because I don't want them living in Carter County, Round County, Lawrence County, Morgan County, unless they want to. If they want to come to Elliott, I need to make that available or do whatever I can to do that. I didn't hear that discussion from anybody else. But when I went back to my office, I looked at my EM director, and he said, how'd that go? And I said, I've got a lot of work to do. In 1977, Elliott County began the grant process to put in low-income apartments in Sandy Hook. Those were purchased and updated in 2023. Those are low income. In 1993, Elliott received another grant and constructed a newer yet smaller-sized income-based apartment complex. This was the last time any housing development was facilitated in our county. To my knowledge, Elliott has never sought after or been offered median income housing of any kind, and quite honestly, it is possible that we never needed it. Today, it isn't just a need, it's a necessity. Our tax base is one of the lowest in the state. 3 years ago, the Board of Education completely closed and sold an elementary school, the one I graduated in. They consolidated it, they put it to other facilities. Those facilities need upgrades. The newest of those facilities was built and opened in 1989, my freshman year at Elliott County High School. And like the majority of Kentucky, we too need teachers and bus drivers. But Elliott is thousands of dollars per educator short in the ability to compete with those wages we see in counties right beside us. My wife left Bourbon County in 2014. We lived on the Bourbon-Clark line. We lived on Van Meter Road. We moved back to Sandy Hook so I could chase my American dream, never once thinking about running for office. She took an $8,000 pay cut, teaching the same style of student with the same mental disabilities in Elliott as she was teaching in Bourbon. Much of this, as you know, is due to the lack of student population. If new investments were introduced in the form of housing for median income applicants and families, then some of those woes would begin to turn. My goal here is to see growth in Elliott, more gas stations, more restaurants, more farm and building supply stores, medicinal facilities, insurance offices, rec centers that want to come to Sandy Hook, that need to come to Sandy Hook because the need is there. And as you know, when these things happen, the tax base for the local government entities begins to rise as well. This causes organic growth, not artificial growth. Artificial growth puts more money on the backs of the working man and lady who's already there. Organic growth is when they decide to move there for a need and they want to be involved. The property values go up, another business comes in, everyone wins. Everyone has that next fast food craze restaurant that might hit on the corner. We want those too, not just the McDonald's at the bridge that had a red light that was shot out in 1980. I was 5. Elliott County has an above average veteran population. That's one thing we got. We have a lower crime rate in Elliott County as other places. The 5 executives of East Park, judge executives of East Park, were working hard to grow East Park in the ad district of FiveCo. We have jobs hopefully coming in the next few years. Round County is growing. I want to be a part of that. And I want folks to go, you know what, I don't want the hustle and bustle of Moorhead. Maybe we'll move to Sandy Hook or one of the outer hollers or roads in Elliott County. Anything you all can do, anything that you'll consider, I would appreciate it as the cheerleader of Elliott County. I'm not pretty in a skirt, but I'll do and I'll yell as loud as I can, and I'll go wherever I can to try to get something coming our way. And I appreciate your time, and I'll answer any questions that you have to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Judge Lewis. I think that Senator Mills has a question for you.
Judge, thank you for being here today. Glad we could squeeze you in on after your request. Let us know what the building trades are in your area. Do you have active home developers that develop 10 or 20 homes at a time in your area, or are things more like building a new home on 20 acres in the country, or how is housing development done in your area?
Senator Mills, I appreciate that question. Thank you. And what I'm seeing now is the tide turning. Elliott County's catching up. Frontier housing in Moorhead is having to evolve. What I saw as 2,000 to 3,500 square foot homes 25 years ago, the need in this generation is changing. They want 1,150 to 1,800 square foot homes, a one-car garage, maybe a side-by-side, maybe a boat. So we're looking, and the rates of building a home are still cheaper in eastern Kentucky because labor rates are lower. The price of materials is the same. You're going to go to Lowe's and pay the same in Moorhead as you probably will in Winchester or in one of the counties down toward western Kentucky, Bowling Green. But I think we're on a cusp here. If we had 20 acres and we could put in some 1,250 to 1,600 square foot homes, what you're seeing is someone making $55,000 at the prison, and they have a spouse who might also be making the same. It puts you in the $100,000 range. You can afford an $850 house payment, and it not make you, as we call it back home, house poor, where all your money is going towards your house and your utilities. The tide is changing, sir. We still have those that want the 100-acre farms, but the tide is changing for this generation. This generation is offering things that I'm a Gen X. I've never seen what this generation, and we just have to catch up.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Lewis, for your perspective and your testimony.
I thank you all.
And now, finally, we've asked Keith Brown from Pike Legal to come and give the task force a brief overview of planning and zoning and some of the impacts to housing that arise from that body of law. So, Mr. Brown, would you please come to the table and introduce yourself before presenting your presentation? Make sure that your green light is on, please.
I think the green light is on. Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me here. My firm is Pike Legal Group. We're a private law firm in Bullitt County, Kentucky, and it's headed up by David Pike. I think he was originally called to do this presentation, but he happens to be in Alaska this week, so couldn't quite make it. So I practiced with David about 30 years doing land use law, having all kinds of adventures representing private clients. We've done housing developments, we've done rock quarries, we've done cell towers, industrial parks, all that kind of thing. I think there's an old song about that goes something like, we paved paradise and put in a parking lot, and we've done some of that. But we've also represented local governments too, in trying to, particularly some of the medium and smaller cities in Kentucky, to try to help them out on their zoning codes, that type of thing. So we are here to give some practical experience rather than policy type guidance here that hopefully will help the task force consider how to promote housing, whether housing in general or whether it's affordable housing. the public policy that is intertwined with housing is certainly spans many different issues, and I've listed some of them here. And we've heard some of them from the mayor and from the county judge executive about economic incentives, taxation. How do you regulate building structures? How do you encourage more dense development? Transportation planning. Roads get very much intertwined with zoning and real estate development, and it creates a lot of consternation because normally new roads come after zoning, and there's a lot of concern about traffic when the applications are going through the zoning process. Utilities are incredibly important to residential development and associated zoning. It also gets tied into annexation, where cities are offering utilities and then the property is annexed, then it's rezoned, that type of thing. School considerations come up in a zoning for new residential development. Everybody wants to know, will there be adequate schools, that type of thing, when the new 400-unit residential subdivision comes in. Density is becoming more and more of an issue. One of the easier ways to get more affordable housing is to allow greater density to move away from the large residential lots that were pretty common in Kentucky in the past. Also, the balance between multifamily and single-family development becomes incredibly important. Is a local zoning body going to approve a new residential subdivision or a new apartment complex, or are they going to approve them side by side? Those issues keep coming up. Recreational opportunities. If you're having a lot of new residential development, do you have the park capacity for those new residents? Do you have the activities for the children, that kind of thing? Then, although we won't go into it today, the Federal Fair Housing Act can come in. You want to make sure that the housing system is not discriminatory, gives opportunities for low and moderate income folks, gives opportunities for affordable housing. Kentucky, as a zoning law state, is what's called an enabling state. Okay, the power to regulate land use in Kentucky comes from you all, the General Assembly. It doesn't come from inherent home rule authority. Some other states you'll find, like Ohio is a lot like this. You have cities that have these charters, and they have pretty much independent authority to zone, and it's even more localized than it is here. But here we have KRS Chapter 100, which is our guidebook on zoning. I call it the alpha and omega of zoning in Kentucky. So it sets up an overall structure for planning and zoning, establishes comprehensive plans, zoning ordinances, planning commissions, boards of adjustment, how the legislative bodies interact, all of that. It allows localities to either choose to adopt planning and zoning or to not adopt it at their discretion. Of course, in Kentucky, a big thing to remember about planning and zoning is that there are a lot of rural areas in Kentucky that do not have planning and zoning at all. Particularly, this is true of the Eastern Mountains area of Kentucky. You'll see a lot of county seat cities which have planning and zoning, but in the unincorporated county, there is no planning and zoning at all. Now, there are other areas of the state where that's true. I'll give you an example. I'm a proud graduate of Murray State and spent a good time down in Murray. But the city of Murray has zoning, but unincorporated Callaway County does not have zoning. So think of the kind of implications that has for development. Just another example, in the central part of the state, I do some work for the city of Lebanon. The city of Lebanon has zoning, but the unincorporated Marion County does not have zoning. Now, there are, of course, many other places that have zoning throughout the county. I'm from Bullitt County, and I guess one of the reasons I got involved in zoning law is because zoning is so contentious in Bullitt County, a suburban county just south of Louisville. And we have a joint planning unit, which is city and county. Each city has an appointee. Many suburban cities have one appointee, and then the county judge executive makes some appointments. So that's a different kind of zoning system. So you have this overall framework in KRS Chapter 100, but boy, it reminds me of the old quote from Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. Well, all zoning is local in Kentucky when you start considering the different formats that are adopted in the different counties and cities. It's important to keep in mind that the Planning Commission and boards of adjustments, that their members are appointed, usually a mayor. If it's a joint system, a mayor will make some appointments. County judge executive will make some appointments. They both have to get legislative body approval, and these people are usually appointed for 4-year terms. They may get $25 a month and a free Christmas buffet or something like that, and they put up with a lot of grief from the community sitting through all those meetings. But they must like it because, boy, I found that term limits doesn't apply, that these people love to be on these zoning boards, and they're some of them, stay on the board for 20, 30 years until they're carried out or whatever. But that's sort of how the system works. A big concept is, of course, zone classifications. KRS 100 generally provides for what's called Euclidean zoning, where you have various zone classifications, maybe different kinds of ag, commercial, industrial, residential. Some of the types of residential zone classifications that you'll see in Kentucky are estate, traditional single family, duplex, patio homes, condominiums, townhouses, that kind of thing. Then apartments, usually is a totally separate classification. Probably a lot of the smaller jurisdictions need to catch up with some of these more innovative classifications because a lot of them have had zoning ordinances that have stayed the same for 30 years or something and don't include some of the newer, more innovative styles that are really good for affordable housing. The comprehensive plan is very important. It's an overall planning document that provides what are the goals and objectives. If you want to encourage housing, then it's good for that to be in the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. KRS 100-213 provides the grounds for a rezoning, say from going from agricultural to residential. The grounds are compliance with comp plan, that the original zone classification is inappropriate, or that there have been changes in social and economic factors in the vicinity which were not anticipated by the comp plan. But the easiest one is to find that it's in compliance with the comp plan. So that can be sort of a foundation document. The planning commissions make the recommendations on rezoning. They have to have a public hearing, and that's where those planning commissioners can take a lot of grief from neighbors. Then the city legislative body or the fiscal court makes the final distinction. There's a little bit difference between, say, Louisville and Lexington in the level of plan certain that the zoning office really wants to know a lot more of the details of the development. In many of the other counties in a rezoning, all the commission really knows is that they're changing from one classification to the next. They don't necessarily get a lot of detail in just the rezoning. Subdivision plats become a very big issue. Once you get your rezoning, if you're a developer and you're going to have like 100-unit development or something, you need to have a subdivision, and that plat is approved by the planning commission. Legislative body doesn't get involved in that. The buck stops at the planning commission. The planning commission can adopt detailed regulations about what needs to be on the plat for each lot, what kind of easements there are for utilities, how the streets are done, all that kind of stuff. Very technical regulations. There's something called the agricultural exemption that creates a problem for people who like subdivision regulations. The agricultural exemption means that if you have 5 acre or more lots that have some tenuous connection to agriculture, that subdivision regs do not apply to them. And you get a lot of development, say in the hilly areas of Kentucky, where you'll have these 5 acre lots that don't have to comply with subdivision regulations. The subdivision regs are supposed to have some connection to the comprehensive plan. They're very technical. As I've said, the Planning Commission makes the decision. The decision on subdivision plats is ministerial. If the developer complies with the technical regulations, the developer should be entitled to approval. However, more and more what you're seeing is not in my backyard type folks opposing subdivision plats and hearings and treating it almost like a rezoning. And quite often, what those people, for better or for worse, want is they don't want a duplicate of their own subdivision outside their backyard because they don't want to look at it. They want to look at a forest. Or they don't want, let's say if they live in a nice residential subdivision, a single family, they don't want to see duplex next door to their subdivision because their argument is that reduces property values, okay? Those kind of battles are occurring around the state on plats. They're occurring in rezonings, which are more on an arbitrariness, substantial evidence review, and it's an ongoing battle. And I don't know how you deal with that from a policy standpoint, but when the rubber hits the road on these developments that are proposed, people will show up who don't want to see more residential housing. They want to look at an open field. So for better or for worse, that's what you see. Now, when you adopt an original regulation, you're not dealing with a specific application. The city council or the fiscal court has very broad authority. That's called legislative review. Some practicalities of the decision process. Wide variation in funding and staff resources for local planning offices. I've met Keith Van Horn before, the Lexington planning director that was here earlier. And of course, the resources the Lexington planning office has is massive. The resources that, say, the Northern Kentucky systems that have access to area planning and design services, which has taxing authority, the resources they have are massive. Louisville Metro, massive zoning resources. A place like Owensboro or Bowling Green, massive resources. These small communities, they're lucky if they have one full-time zoning administrator, okay? They don't have the resources to go into all the detail. And so their zoning ordinance doesn't have all the detail because it's too hard to adopt new text amendments, too expensive, that type of thing. But nonetheless, those zoning officials, their recommendations are critical. But then you get into the not in my backyard folks, the neighbors who have their own issues, and they can have tremendous influence on the decisions. I wanted to talk briefly about judicial review. What happens when a development is approved, whether it's housing or industrial or whatever? What happens? Well, it can either go on and be built, or someone can file a KRS 100-347 appeal in circuit court, and then the real fun starts, right? Numerous such cases are filed around the state every year. It's supposed to be an on-the-record review, not a trial, not a jury trial, that type of thing. But they can go on for a long time, okay? They can be tied up in court for years. Judicial review is usually deferential. Usually a circuit court doesn't want to step over the city council and intervene in the policy decisions. They want to see that due process was complied with, nobody had a conflict of interest, that the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance were properly followed, and they want to see specific findings of fact. They want to see exactly why such and such was approved, because if they're having to review it, how can they review it if the board doesn't tell them 1, 2, 3, 4, this is why it was approved? So that's what they're looking for. The problem for developers is when one of these lawsuits is filed, what do? You may have authority to go ahead and build your development because there's no injunction, but if you lose, the court decisions say you could have to tear your development down. You know, if you're a rock quarry, you have to fill in the hole that you dug, okay? So developers are skittish about going ahead and building if they get an approval. So they just try to ride out the litigation, okay, which can take years if it goes particularly to appeal. Now, breaking news, KRS 100.3471, that was the appeal bond statute that the legislature passed in 2017. I'm not sure how many of you were here at that time, but it eventually worked its way through the courts. Last Thursday, the Kentucky Supreme Court, in a 4-3 decision, declared that appeal bond statute unconstitutional, okay? And the Chief Justice was on the dissenting side, but the 4-justice majority said that the Kentucky Constitution basically guarantees somebody a right of appeal from the circuit court to the Court of Appeals, and so you cannot, as a legislature, restrict that. The only government authority that could restrict that would be the Supreme Court if they adopted a bonding requirement, which they have not. So unless somehow the Supreme Court reconsiders that decision, which I would say no chance, it's like a 50-page decision, that statute is gone, okay? Which means that the people who like to file lawsuits challenging developments, whether it's housing or industrial or whatever, they love what the Supreme Court did on Thursday because that allows these protracted litigations to go on and on. So I know I've run through a lot of this pretty quickly, and just the conclusion, the challenge for the legislature is, you know, what policies should you adopt? Just throwing out some food for thought here. I wonder if planning units should be required to follow the comprehensive plan. The current law is that the comprehensive plan is a guide, not a straitjacket. So you could have a locality adopt all these pro-housing goals in a comp plan, but when the not in my backyard people show up at a hearing, turn it down, and the court would say, well, the comp plan is only a guide. They didn't have to follow that. Should there be provisions in KRS 100 requiring localities to be more permissive for affordable housing? Should these hearings on residential subdivision plats, which are technical and ministerial, should they be more subject to delegation to the zoning administrator so much controversy is not created? So overall, I know I've went through a lot of things fast, and I've just wanted to give you the highlights. There are many great things you can do for housing, public policy to encourage housing, but zoning is sort of like a prickly pear that is difficult to get around because of the individual nature of it and how the controversies come up in these hearings. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. I think that Senator Mills has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Appreciate the presentation and the good notes that we can all take home and look at. I spent 5 years on my local planning and zoning board, and 3 of them on the Board of Zoning and Adjustments. So had plenty of arguments about yard barns and fences and things like that. But I appreciate the thoroughness there. I think the key on zoning is that what you just said is that it's local, and I think every community fights the battle of where's the balance, and allowing development versus property rights and people's rights to be heard. And I think that's best solved case by case basis in the communities. But I do think that there might be some work around. Senator Yates just gave a couple of ideas around this court decision that we might be able to work around to try to make sure something doesn't completely come to a complete stop in some of our urban areas where development's needed. So maybe we can get that in our notes and talk about that in the future. But thank you for the education. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I think that's all for today. The next meeting of the committee will be Tuesday, September 24th, right here in Frankfort. There being no more business before the task force, without objection, this meeting is adjourned.